What do you think of Eve?
I know Eve better than anyone. She wanted success. She had her own ideas on how to get it. She lied, she cheated, she forgot moral scruples, and when necessary, she even walked in and out of her friends' hearts without knocking, leaving nothing but contempt. But I loved her.
Just like it is the case with Eleanor Parker, you could say that Anne Baxter also occasionally feels a little bit like the, quote, other nominee in 1950. She obviously plays an essential role in the year's Best Picture winner and undeniable Hollywood classic, but her work often almost becomes forgotten next to her co-star and co-nominee Bette Davis, who by now has taken over essentially every conversation around All About Eve and turned into its major, and very often, only reference point. However, again like with Eleanor Parker, it would be unfair to dismiss Anne Baxter too easily here. After all, her Eve Harrington has also become a part of movie history. The young schemer who will stop at nothing to get ahead is by now almost a symbol for an entire industry and entire careers.
I've seen All About Eve.
Who?
Poor Eve.
And in her life's work that includes a remarkable amount of Hollywood classics and artistic achievements, it is this performance that is still remembered as Anne Baxter's greatest triumph, which immortalized her on the screen forever, even if constantly in the shadow of the larger-than-life Bette Davis. For Anne Baxter, All About Eve was not a breakthrough the way Caged was for Eleanor Parker. In 1950, Anne was already an Academy Award winner, but Eve Harrington confirmed her status in Hollywood and validated the years of hard work she had spent to establish herself as a leading actress in prestige pictures. I know people will discuss if her decision to campaign for Best Actress cost Bette the Oscar that year for all eternity, and I will go into my own opinion about Anne's category placement later. But this discussion should not take attention away from her actual achievements in 1950 and the years before, when she came to Hollywood at a very young age and was quickly noticed for her talents and on-screen personality, working with highly acclaimed directors and co-stars in a variety of different parts and genres. And during these early years of her career, Anne Baxter had also made it very clear that she was always willing to play darker and more challenging roles that many other actresses would have rejected, never afraid to explore the flawed side of her characters, and again a bit like Eleanor Parker, able to find the depths of human complexities and corruption behind initially trustworthy, helpless, and seemingly simple exteriors. So it's time to look at the career of Anne Baxter and the performance that brought her into this legendary Best Actress lineup, as Eve Harrington, the titular role in All About Eve. To continue the comparisons to Eleanor Parker, Anne Baxter too developed an interest in acting at a very young age. And also like Eleanor, she had the support of her family for these artistic ambitions. But their starting points were still very different. Eleanor Parker came from a very humble background, and the support of her parents meant that they would not object to their daughter's dreams, but she still had to make her own living and work as a waitress to earn the money for acting school. Anne Baxter, on the other hand, came from a family that actively fostered any artistic ambitions, and also had the money and the connections to do it. Anne Baxter's grandfather, Frank Lloyd Wright, was one of the most famous architects in the country and probably in the world, and his daughter, Anne Baxter's mother, would always encourage her children to follow their dreams and aim to achieve whatever they set their heart out to do. So while Eleanor Parker fell in love with acting while watching actresses on the screen whenever her family could afford to go, Anne Baxter began to envision it as her desired profession when she saw Helen Hayes and other Broadway giants on the stage in New York. I knew with my first conscious thought that I wanted to be an actress, so I was constantly imagining myself as some character I'd read about in a book or seen on the stage, surrounded by all the other characters in the book or play. And they were my friends and playmates.
I'm afraid it came around 3 years old.
Really? How?
Well, they were private showings. My family tell a marvelous
Were you
story.
acting at 3, really?
Oh, yes, no doubt, yes. I don't think they quite took my acting career as seriously as I did, because I had no sense of humor at all at this point. Oh, Gad. I used to go buy Maybelline blue eyeshadow and put it under my eyes and over my eyes, practice crying, lock myself in my room, fall on the piano with a crash.
Anne Baxter soon attended an acting school and later studied with renowned Russian actress and acting teacher Maria Uspenskaya, whom you might know as a supporting actress nominee for Dauth and Love Affair. Uspenskaya taught Anne Baxter the Stanislavski method, but Anne remembers that she was quite a difficult student and often clashed with her teacher about her approach to a part and a character.
And when I left the school, I was originally very much afraid of Madame. All of us were. She didn't dispel this illusion. She used it. And I sat in the chair opposite her, and I was finished. I was no longer afraid of her, you see. And I was completely relaxed. She looked at me and she said, "Anne." I said, "Yes, Madame." She said, "You see how you are now?" I said, "Yes, Madame." "That's the way you should go into a scene." I said, "Like this?" And she said, "Yes." Do you know it has taken me 37 years to learn what the hell she meant? And to do it.
Yes.
To do it.
What did she mean?
She mean total coolth, total relaxation.
What's important to note here is that even if Anne Baxter's background certainly opened doors for her, her family never allowed her to rest on these connections, instead always demanding that she had to do the best she could to make it on her own and excel in whatever path she chooses for herself. Anne Baxter credited her ambitious personality with these strict demands of her parents. "I like to be independent. This is because when I was a youngster, my parents often said to me, 'Whatever you do is alright with us, but you have to do it well and make a living at it.'"
They were, in some ways, very old-fashioned, and in other ways, very much ahead of themselves. They sat me down and said, "Now look, we'd like to plan your education, and we'd like you, we don't care, you can be a lady plumber. If you want to be a lady plumber, that's all right." That would have been a good idea, as a matter of fact.
Study your work, huh?
Oh, yes. But we would like you to choose one thing and do it well. And I said, "I'd like to try to be an actress." And they said, "All right, if you keep up your schoolwork, we'll back you 1,000%. So I went into New York, took drama lessons at Theodora Irvine School of the Theater. Came out with my father on the 517. You know, we commuted from Bronxville. And then through a fluke, through something such as I saw this afternoon at the neighborhood playhouse, you know, where they have young actors in short plays, I got a job.
And then made her official acting debut at the age of 13. Not like many other actresses I have talked about in their drama club or a small local theater, but instead on the Great White Way in the play Seen But Not Heard, which opened in September 1936. I made my entrance sliding down a banister. A boy was supposed to catch me. I had refused him, and I never knew when he would let me slide right past and go straight through the wall of the scene. That happened several times. Theater critics reacted very positively to the young stage actress and often singled Anne Baxter out in their reviews, calling her a natural talent and charming stage presence. The success confirmed for Anne that acting was what she wanted to do for the rest of her life, telling a newspaper at the time, "Acting is not merely fun, it is an earnest career. There is no stopping my ambition."
What was you remember your feelings at that moment when you walked in?
Terrified.
I bet. I mean, when you walk out on stage at the age of 13, do your lines just automatically go 8,000 miles away?
No.
Totally out of your mind? No?
No, I learned to develop concentration. I had been trained, you know.
Yes.
I was commuting into New York from Bronxville
I see.
and going to drama school twice a week when I was 11.
A few years later, Anne also auditioned for the role of Katharine Hepburn's younger sister in the Philadelphia Story, but Kate allegedly did not see the natural talent, accusing Anne of overacting and missing a comedic instinct. It was an early disappointment for Anne, but her career still took a sudden turn upwards when Kay Brown, agent of David O. Selznick and forever known for recommending a little novel called Gone with the Wind to him, thought that the 16-year-old would be perfect for Selznick's upcoming movie version of the gothic romance novel Rebecca. At the time, Testing for the leading role of the second Mrs. De Winter was the new testing for Scarlett O'Hara, as Rebecca was Selznick's first movie after his Civil War epic, and he had learned that excessive screen tests make great publicity and can even create new stars. For Anne Baxter, the invitation to Hollywood was therefore a very promising opportunity, and allegedly, director Alfred Hitchcock was very pleased with the childlike innocence that she brought to the part. However, a test with Laurence Olivier immediately destroyed Anne's hopes, who later said that her visible baby fat and in general very childlike appearance made her look rather like Olivier's daughter than his wife. Still, Darryl Zanuck, head of 20th Century Fox, felt that she possessed a valuable talent and definite potential, and offered her a 7-year contract with his studio.
You have said of yourself at the age of 12 that you were fat and pudgy.
I was.
You were?
I was square. Not at that age, later on.
Oh.
In adolescence. I was in the usual adolescent emotional morass. And
was acting a way out of that in any sense?
No, it made it almost more difficult because there was a lot of pressure. When I came out, for instance, to make the tests for Rebecca, I was 15. And I was playing a svelte young woman, quite a few years older than myself. And they put me in wax baths at Elizabeth Arden, and I got rug burned from doing exercises on the carpet in the Chateau Elysee Hotel. And I had, in one of the tests with Mr. Olivier, I had a rubber girdle on. It was absolutely immobile from here to here.
At the age of 15?
I was 15, and I was just square. And I was kind of storing nuts for the winter, you know?
Following this arrival in Hollywood, Anne Baxter's start at the studio was rather rocky. While she was recognized for her talents, nobody at 20th Century Fox really knew what to do with the young actress, loaning her out instead to MGM for the western 20 Mule Team, starring Gloria Swanson's first husband, Wallace Beery. Notices for the newcomer were overall positive, and critics agreed that Anne Baxter showed talent, charm and personality. Anne then had her first big breakthrough in 1942 when she appeared in the popular war movie The Pied Piper, and thanks to the influence of Joseph Cotten, who remembered her audition for The Philadelphia Story, in Orson Welles' The Magnificent Ambersons, 2 movies that were nominated for Best Picture at the Academy Awards. This combined triumph was for many a first sign that Anne Baxter had it, and that she was here to stay. Critics complimented her work in The Pied Piper, and despite overall mixed reactions to The Magnificent Ambersons, singled her out as one of the movie's highlights, lovely, skillful and convincing. At the time, her success in 1942 put her for many on the map as the top contender for the leading role in The Song of Bernadette, until Jennifer Jones came along. And while none of the movies Anne Baxter did in the following years achieved any true longevity, they still paired her with co-stars like Erich von Stroheim, Dana Andrews, Tallulah Bankhead or Tyrone Power, and directors like Billy Wilder or Louis Milestone.
Let's talk about, though, at the age of 17, here you were appearing in movies with big stars. I mean, some of the best leading men in Hollywood. For example, what's your first reaction? First thing you think of when I say Clark Gable?
What do you want me to say? He was the king. They called him the king. That was his nickname at Metro.
Yeah.
He was utterly charming, and I must say, when I came home to my beautiful husband, John Hodiak, I was slightly ashamed. I had enjoyed kissing Mr. Gable all day.
Joseph Cotten, great actor.
Oh, yes.
Good guy.
Lovely guy.
Yeah.
Wicked sense of humor.
Oh, really?
A lot of fun. Oh, yes. Marvelous man.
Like Eleanor Parker, Anne Baxter was often cast as the supporting love interest or the girl next door. But she got those parts in movies that made an impression at the time. She did not have to work her way up from B-movies, but was a steady presence in A-level material almost right from the start, and almost always to loud acclaim. And it did not take long for critics to call her one of the most promising dramatic actresses, especially praising her ability to adopt different accents in her movies, seamlessly switching from one personality to another.
What do you think I stayed on here on this 50 place for? I was waiting for them, understand?
So Anne Baxter's talent was obvious to everyone, but despite this ongoing acclaim for her work and appearances in popular movies, 20th Century Fox was still uncertain what to do with this newcomer. Despite her youth, she was not a typical young starlet. Anne Baxter herself was very open about the fact that she was often considered too short for many co-stars, and that her baby fat still cost her roles as romantic leads. Many at 20th Century Fox in fact referred to her as Baby Baxter. And critics often called her simple, natural, lovely and charming, which are all nice ways to say not glamorous. She later said that studio head Darryl Zanuck thought all women were either broads or librarians. He thought I was a librarian, a cold potato.
Two general categories of women. I mean, if you had brains, you had no sex. If you had sex, you had no brains.
And you had brains.
Either broads or librarians, and he had some crazy idea that I had brains, you see.
So despite her youth, Anne's lack of sex appeal also meant that, as she herself remembered, she was essentially considered an old hag at 15, and that I was a character actress at 23. She was therefore stuck to mostly secondary parts that called for an actress to be supportive and lovely, but without the need to truly capture the audience. Unable to compete with established leading stars like Bette Davis, Ingrid Bergman or Greer Garson, but also unable to find a place among truly established supporting players. Anne Baxter therefore continued to jump from one part to the other, maybe to critical acclaim, but without true stardom. Until 20th Century Fox tried something different and allowed her for the first time to play a more sinister character in 1945's A Guest in the House. Critics reacted extremely positively to this change of image and considered Anne's performance the best of her career so far. Some of her reviews reading like early versions of those in 1950, such as Anne Baxter played with full understanding of evil implications of her actions, or Anne Baxter underplays her role as the diabolical Evelyn so well and intelligently that she could have deceived a group of more or less rational people. More than ever before, critics were curious to see what she would do next and if she would find another vehicle that benefited so much from her distinct screen persona. And while her 1946 movies Smokey and Angel on My Shoulder did not do much for her in this regard, her third picture of the year was the peak everybody had been waiting for. Anne Baxter herself later said, "1946 had been quite a year. I had married, and through a ridiculous Hollywood series of flukes, got the coveted part of Sophie in The Razor's Edge." Sophie was again not a lead, but still one of Hollywood's most sought-after roles of the year, offered to actresses like Susan Hayward, Betty Grable and Judy Garland, who all either felt not up to the demanding emotional complexities of a woman who mourns the loss of a child and her husband and turns to prostitution, or considered it too depressing. The most likely contender for the role at the time was Bonita Grenville, but Anne Baxter still inquired at the studio about the possibility of making a test. I knew about the film. They had tested 13 girls on and off the 20th Century Fox lot. It never occurred to me they'd even consider me for the part. I'd been sidetracked into sweet ingenue roles, and from what I'd heard about Sophie, I didn't have a prayer. To be considered for the role, Anne met with director Edmund Goulding to talk to him about the character of Sophie. He thought I was an all-American girl and wouldn't understand Sophie. I was, but when he told me the terrible things that Sophie had done, I added a few. Anne Baxter later said, describing how she shocked Goulding with stories of Germany during the 1920s that she had heard from Alfred Hitchcock, and which showed him that she definitely could handle the role. Goulding then agreed to test Anne, and the part was hers. To prepare for the role, she combined her own experiences as a young socialite with impressions that she had collected from watching various women at Hollywood parties. They arrive looking posed and beautifully dressed. Bit by bit, after many cocktails, they grow boisterous. Their eyes begin to lose that keen focus. Small gestures become large ones. Their walk changes to a lurching determination to arrive quickly at a given point. Little scenes kept coming back to me when I was doing Sophie. Memories of 100 episodes I'd seen. When The Razor's Edge premiered in 1946, Anne Baxter's performance quickly became one of the major conversation topics in Hollywood. Reviewers praised her in all superlatives and correctly declared the Best Supporting Actress race at the Oscars over and done with.
I want to thank all the Academy members for this very great honor. I'd like to present my appreciation to Mr. Zanuck for the opportunity to play Sophie, and above all, my deepest thanks to Mr. Eddie Goulding, without whose fine direction and understanding Sophie never would have been. I'm deeply grateful. Thank you again.
Finally, Anne Baxter had realized her full potential. For her, Sophie came precisely at the right moment in her career. Because it was maybe a demanding and challenging role, but even more important, it wasn't a glamorous role. Sophie was a woman trapped in a circle of self-destruction, and Anne Baxter's willingness to play her without sugarcoating made it a perfect fit for her own professional attitude and her entire Hollywood persona. Since she was not seen as the glamorous type, she had now found a different way to make an impression. She was constantly praised for her willingness to not wear makeup and showing herself so downtrodden on the screen, and in a year when movies like Rome Open City came to the States with a new style of realism, Anne Baxter was applauded for bringing the same kind of realism to American movies. So The Razor's Edge was clearly a peak for Anne Baxter, but the constant emphasis on her unglamorous appearance, her natural ordinariness, that aforementioned realism also began to hurt her, and after she received a fan letter asking her if she was as heavy in real life as she looked in the movie, and I'm sorry but what? She decided to change the course of her career, going on a diet and aiming to build up a more glamorous Hollywood image. She felt that an Academy Award had not only proven her talent, but also her appeal, and hoped to establish herself as a leading actress moving forward. However, the Oscar win ultimately had little impact on the opinion of Darryl Zanuck, who continued to view Anne Baxter as a secondary priority, an actress may be suited for dowdy character roles, but who lacked the necessary looks and personality to be built up as a first-class leading star. In Anne Baxter's own words, he continued to see her as a librarian, again casting her in supporting roles opposite bigger names and giving her leading roles only after other actresses became unavailable. She filled in for Yellow Sky after Paulette Goddard dropped out, did The Walls of Jericho as a replacement for Gene Tierney, and appeared in the Dan Daly musical You're My Everything instead of Jean Crane. On the other hand, she was often refused for parts she actually wanted. For example, the lead in Elia Kazan's Pinky.
I don't think they knew what to do with me, Jim, because I'd won an Academy Award for a part that was a woman who was 40 and
this was
on dope.
The Razor's Edge.
Yes, and I was 23. What were they going to do? You know, I mean, I was no threat to Betty Grable, God knows. So whenever there was a part that either some director like Joe Mankiewicz wanted me for, or somebody got sick, or they didn't know how to cast it, then, or it had an accent, a foreign accent of some kind, they called me.
So Anne Baxter was maybe praised for her ability to jump from genre to genre, essentially being the actress who can do it all, but she was rarely the go-to actress directors or producers had in mind first, which is also true for the most remembered role of her career. I have already talked about the making of All About Eve in my Bette Davis video, so if you haven't seen that yet and want to know more about the casting of the other principal parts and how the movie was received, I will link it below. But what's important to know is that many of the performers in it were not the first choice for their parts. José Ferrer was initially considered for Edison DeWitt, and Bette Davis of course stepped in as a replacement for Claudette Colbert. And in the case of Eve Harrington, there were also many other names mentioned first by Darryl Zanuck, especially Jean Crane, at the time one of Hollywood's most popular and financially successful actresses, who had just expanded her talents into more serious territory, appearing in Pinky, the role Anne Baxter did not get, and in Joseph L. Mankiewicz's A Letter to Three Wives. But the director was allegedly not too keen to work with her again, later saying, "This Crane girl cannot project anything. She was very nice, but she didn't live being an actress. There was no way that she could get into the heart of Eve." In return, Senick suggested contract player Anne Baxter. Remembering her work in A Guest in the House and feeling that she had what he called bitch virtuosity, Mankiewicz agreed. Anne Baxter furthermore also benefited from the fact that at the time of her casting, Claudette Colbert was still set to play Margot Channing, and Senick felt that both actresses shared a natural similarity that would make the story of the young actress trying to take over the life of the big star more intriguing. Claudette Colbert herself later said that Anne Baxter, as a young girl, looked very much like me. And that was the point of it, that this young girl had a fixation about the older actress. She looked like her and she thought she could be better. When Betty did the role, it became a whole different thing.
One of your big breaks, I suppose, was All About Eve, where you played that.
That was another great experience. High quality and required characterization, which I love. It was bigger for Betty than for me because Betty fell in love on top of doing Margot.
Yeah.
For Anne Baxter, Eve was the kind of role she had been waiting for, again allowing her to use her natural screen instincts to her best advantage, as she could defy audiences' expectations and turn her own typecasting as the good girl from next door upside down. She talked extensively to Joseph Mankiewicz about her role, which he described as, "There are Eves afoot in every competitive stratum of our society. Wherever there's a top you can get to from the bottom. She'll make or steal her own gold stars to take home. She'll throw fits, even run up a fake fever, if the price is worth it to her. If it was to her advantage, Eve would hump a cat." Mankiewicz allegedly also based Eve's acceptance speech and his direction of Anne Baxter's performance on Olivia de Havilland's Oscar speech for To Each His Own.
My common sense reminds me quite clearly that most of the work that went into earning this award was not done by Lizzie de Havilland at all, but by a big team of other people.
That I regarded as bestowed upon me only in part. The larger share belongs to my friends in the theater.
When I think of the writer who created Jodie Norris, and how much of her sprang from the heart and mind of the director,
without whose great play and faith in me, this night could never have been.
When I remember the businessmen who found and managed the money which produced her and distributed her.
Dear, sentimental, generous, courageous Max Fabian.
Anne herself also based her interpretation of Eve on a real-life person. "I patterned my performance after my first understudy on Broadway at 13, who was nice to everybody but me, and would always be in the wings, watching me like a hawk. In the movie, I tried to follow Betty around with my eyes to get that feeling across."
Oh, yes, she used to say, "I'm going to feed you a poisoned oyster."
I see.
And those eyes, she had beautiful, big, ripe olive eyes. And I'd come to my mother and I'd say, "Listen, Cora said she's going to feed me a poisoned oyster. You think she means it?"
Shooting of All About Eve was just as pleasant and exciting for Anne as it was for Bette Davis and the other cast members, describing it as the perfect experience. "I was good, I was respected. I had a great part, the script was superb. None of us could wait to get to work. Filming was like a delightful group therapy session, and Mankiewicz was the psychiatrist."
But we were thrilled, because it was literate in the extreme. I mean, when do you have a script that you can read as you can read a play? For ye gods, that was fantastic. And to have had so much fun.
Another reason why Anne enjoyed making All About Eve so much was actually Bette Davis, with whom she developed a very friendly relationship. Despite any stories in the media, which of course hoped to get a real-life version of the feud between Margot and Eve. The studio tried to play that all up. I liked Betty very much. She'd come on the set and go "sss" at me. But that was just a joke between us. I adore Betty, of course. She's wonderful.
You're supposed to be at one another's throats and cut the atmosphere with a knife and that sort of thing. There was nothing like that. Not only that, but Betty fell madly in love with Gary. And On top of everything else, love was in bloom.
Bette herself was also very complimentary of Anne Baxter's work during filming, saying, "Margot and Eve's relationship worked on 2 or 3 levels. Anne was really playing a double role, one thing on the surface, another underneath. I called it the sweet bitch. Her part was more difficult than mine." Bette would later also name Anne Baxter among 4 actresses she truly admired, next to Olivia de Havilland, Mary Astor and Jenna Rowlands. The only difficulty on the set was actually between Bette Davis and a different actress.
I walk onto the set and there's Bette and I say, "Good morning." And she said, "Oh shit, good manners." And I felt as if I'd been hit in the face with a wet flounder. And I never spoke to her again. She called me a bitch. Okay.
Oh, relax, kid. It's just me and my big mouth.
Anne Baxter later said that the only difficulties she experienced while shooting All About Eve were during her scenes with George Sanders. Not because they did not get along, but because they approached their work very differently, especially during their final confrontation scene. Anne described herself as a starting gate actress. "From the moment I climb into the makeup chair, my mind is prancing around the track, eyeing the gate the first take. Many actors are the opposite. They start to really move in the stretch, in the 5th or 6th take. By then, actor A is losing ground if he or she isn't careful." Sanders was exactly this kind of opposite to Anne Baxter, and she remembered how he would always come to the set from taking a nap in his dressing room and usually yawn through the first takes. Director Mankiewicz would eventually tell Anne to calm down and wait until Sanders was ready. By take 7, both he and Anne were finally on the same level.
That $500 brought you straight to New York, didn't it?
She was a liar! She was a liar!
As I have said in my Bette Davis video, when All About Eve premiered, the praise of critics for every aspect of the film was essentially unanimous, and this included Anne Baxter's performance as well. Reviews stated that she had the most difficult role in the movie, which she played superbly, that she gave one of the slimiest and most effective characterizations in Hollywood history, and that Eve Harrington was essentially the greatest role of her career that would most likely put her in contention for an Academy Award. There were, however, also some negative assessments of her work, stating that she was too eager to be convincing, that she was not very believable in the movie's later scenes, and that, quite frankly, she could never be a threat to Bette Davis. This also leads us to the fact that, even so there were some critics who felt that both Bette and Anne were each superb in their own way, it was generally agreed that Bette was definitely in a league of her own. Each article talked in much more detail about her performance before moving on to Anne with far fewer words, everyone essentially agreeing that she was not on the same level. The consensus was basically that Anne might be great, but Bette was greater. Even Joseph Mankiewicz, who praised Bette Davis very often in very glowing and detailed statements, later only had 3 words for Anne: a good actress. Still, All About Eve was a very satisfying moment in Anne Baxter's career, because it was the first time she got truly critical raves for a truly prominent part. The Razor's Edge had shown her willingness to defy audiences' expectations and play parts that didn't ask her to be charming, lovely or likable, and she had done it again, in a better movie and in a better written, central leading role. It was the kind of breakthrough she had been waiting for many years, and realized that, with constant Oscar talk connected to her performance, this was her chance to finally make the transition to a classic leading actress. Now, there are many different stories surrounding her Best Actress nomination, mostly that Anne Baxter insisted against the studio's wishes to be campaigned as lead, saying, the film, after all, was about how different people saw Eve. However, other sources say that 20th Century Fox had planned to campaign her in lead all along to make room for supporting players Celeste Holm and Selma Ritter. And the fact that all 4 actresses got nominations in the end showed that their campaign to get as many Oscar nods as possible was ultimately successful. Focus on the possible Oscar wins would come next. I talk about the actual Oscar race in my Julie Holliday video, so for now, it's time to give you my own thoughts on Anne Baxter's legendary performance, and what I think about her category placement. First of all, I want to address the elephant in the room and say that, in my opinion, Anne Baxter 100% belongs into this category, and I cannot understand the constant complaints that she should have campaigned for supporting actress. Eve is a leading role, not because she is the titular role. I mean, Vanessa Redgrave was Julia in Julia, and she is in no way a lead, but simply because both her and Margot are treated equally by the script, and are given the same chances by Joseph Mankiewicz. Intriguing arcs, dominating storylines, and material that an actress can completely sink her teeth into. Going into it from point zero, Margot Channing and Eve Harrington are both the leading drivers of the movie. I think the reason why this perception has changed so much today actually lies in the casting of these two parts. As I have said in my review about Bette Davis, she so effortlessly slips into the role of Margot Channing and steals the entire movie without even trying, becoming a force to be reckoned with and quite simply overshadowing everyone around her by the nature of the character. Due to Bette Davis's performance, All About Eve became All About Margot, and despite its ensemble nature, would forever be regarded as a Bette Davis movie. But this dominance has not only happened due to the casting of Margot, but also the casting of Eve. If an actress who could have held her own against Bette Davis, who had this fire and music, who believably portrayed a skillful player both off and on the stage, then the view on this category placement might be different today. But the truth is that, at least in my personal opinion, Anne Baxter was not this actress, which is why Eve often seems to disappear next to Margot, and feels strangely thin and unsatisfying in a role that had enormous potential on paper.
He woke me up at 3 o'clock in the morning, banging on my door. He couldn't sleep, he said. He'd left Karin. Couldn't go on with a play or anything else until I promised to marry him.
I have to say right away that, even though I have problems with Anne Baxter's work here, there is never a moment in All About Eve where I think that she is actually hurting the movie or threatens to destroy its flow. Instead, she completely integrates herself into the outstanding ensemble and contributes to the success of the story. But looking at it from a different angle, I think this has mostly to do with the fact that the remaining actors possess the necessary vitality to compensate for her often stoic acting choices, pulling her along, and then of course the writing, which gives her the most drastic story arc, also benefits her greatly. The character of Eve is captivating by nature, and it would take a far less effective approach than that of Anne Baxter to destroy this effect. But I still think that her work often lacks the needed energy and believability to succeed completely.
It was very thoughtful of you, Eve.
Mr. Sampson's birthday. I couldn't forget that. You'd never forgive me. As a matter of fact, I sent him a telegram myself.
Coming back to Eleanor Parker, Anne Baxter also possesses a certain artificiality in her acting that sometimes can work in her roles, but sometimes doesn't. And I feel that there are too many moments in All About Eve where it doesn't. Especially in the first half of the movie, Anne Baxter fails to make the major plotline entirely believable for me. The interest of Margot Channing and everyone else in Eve's character. Yes, Eve is supposed to be an outsider, but there is something so fake in her adoration, so robot-like in the way she talks to Celeste Holmes' Karin, so emotionless in her retelling of Eve's life story, that I cannot for 1 minute believe that these difficult people would accept her into their group so easily.
They forwarded the telegram from Milwaukee. The one that came from Washington. To say that Eddie wasn't coming at all. That Eddie was dead.
I won't deny that Anne Baxter does have great instincts for the part. She knows when to be devoted and when to appear innocent, when to expose an evil smile, and when to let go completely, but the realization of these instincts lack the necessary, yes, I have to say it, fire and music. Despite being only 26 years old at the time, there is something far too mature about her that would cause Margot to feel protective. I actually think that Eleanor Parker might have been an ideal choice for the role. Yes, she was even older than Anne Baxter, but innocence and corruption came far more easily to her. To put it frankly, Anne's acting in those early moments never feels convincing, and it feels even less convincing that she could ever be a threat to Margot Channing on the stage. Everything about Anne and Eve lacks the passion to make this believable for me. Again, I get that she is holding back on purpose, but even her later scenes, when Eve exposes who she really is, cannot convince me of that fire and music.
You and Lloyd. How long, even in the theater, before people forgot what happened and trusted you again?
Anne Baxter's slightly monotonous acting choices also make other scenes in the movie rather perplexing, and constantly pose the question why so many would ever be fooled by her like this. From her too breezy and melodramatic attempt to become Margot's understudy, to lying to Addison DeWitt in the most obvious ways, to a kind of almost mustache-twirling attempt at flirting with Margot's boyfriend Bill. Again, as I have said, Anne Baxter never ruins any scenes, but they just feel far too two-dimensional and limited in her hands, especially compared to everyone else in the cast and the complexity of the script.
Imagine to know every night that different hundreds of people love you. They smile, their eyes shine, you've pleased them. They want you. You belong.
However, I want to point out that Anne Baxter does get better as the movie progresses. I'm not saying that her scenes opposite Celeste Holm are flawless, because it again feels too one-dimensional, but Anne Baxter does finally succeed to work in better harmony with the script and adjust her style to the situation. It's not always logical, but it's certainly entertaining. And Anne also shines in other later moments. Her confrontation scene with George Sanders finally packs the emotional punch we've been waiting for, especially because the melodrama of Anne's acting choices truly fits the scene. Again, I wish she had found more depth here, but she still holds her own very well. And her final scenes, when we see Eve for who she is, lazy, uncaring, too sure of herself to see what's going on right in front of her, make the overall arc of Anne Baxter quite impressive after all.
How'd you get up here from Brooklyn?
Subway.
How long does it take?
Oh, with changing and everything, a little over an hour.
It's after 1 now. You won't get home till all hours.
I don't care if I never get home.
That's the door.
So there remains a certain frustration, as the role itself certainly had the potential to become an all-timer on its own, and not due to the connection to the movie that surrounds it, but I think that Anne Baxter was just not the right actress to fulfill all of its potential. Still, it's a captivating performance that works within the structure of the picture and never takes away from its overall achievements. Following her Best Actress nomination for All About Eve, Anne Baxter wanted to further establish herself as a leading performer, and also try to change her on-screen image in general, recommending herself as more than a character actress, but rather a glamorous star for the 1950s. Blonde, exciting, more sexual, no longer the mousy girl from next door, stuck in the same types of roles. But as it had happened in the 1940s, she again just couldn't compete with the leading ladies that emerged during the new decade. Actresses like Elizabeth Taylor, Grace Kelly, Audrey Hepburn, or her All About Eve co-star Marilyn Monroe. Anne Baxter was maybe only 27 years old, but she again lacked the usefulness of many performers she was competing against for leading roles, but also without the maturity and star power of a, say, Deborah Kerr or Susan Hayward. On top of that, All About Eve was also not the same kind of star vehicle for her as Born Yesterday was for Judy Holliday or Caged for Eleanor Parker. She was recognized as a leading actress in it, but not as the leading actress. Even when she finally got this recognition, she still played second fiddle. For her, All About Eve was a triumph, but again not one that recommended her for further prestige projects or big leading roles, and also not one that made Daryl Zanuck think of her differently than before. After she unsuccessfully tried to get cast in How to Marry a Millionaire, in the role that would ultimately be played by Betty Grable, Anne Baxter finally left 20th Century Fox and signed a 2-picture deal with Warner Brothers, and worked as a freelancer moving forward. She buried herself in work in a variety of different movies, as well as on TV and on the stage in London and the US. She worked with director Charles Laughton in the play Body. She finally got to work with Alfred Hitchcock and went to Munich to film Carnival Story. But none of her movies made any true lasting impacts at the time, even if her personal notices continued to be excellent. Her biggest success in the 50s again happened in a supporting role in Cecil B. DeMille's religious epic The Ten Commandments, which is also one of her most remembered roles today.
Moses! Oh, Moses. Moses! Oh, Moses. And Moses?
Anne Baxter's life then did a complete turnaround when she married her second husband Randolph Galt in 1960 and agreed to raise cattle with him on a farm in Australia. In that one sentence I had said I'd be his wife, I had cut away years of personal ties and cancelled a career. He never insisted on the latter, quite the opposite, but I knew that the remoteness of Australia would finish it. I had said I'd go to an unknown place, toward an uncharted life.
1960, you made quite a transition in your life. What was that all about? You went to Australia?
It was all about love, my dear man. I fell madly, passionately in love with an American who had an enticing horizon. He wanted to make a new life in Australia. So I chucked it, and I went with him. We have two beautiful daughters, as a matter of fact.
But Anne Baxter did not just move to Australia, she moved to the outbacks. To an old ranch without any furniture, a generator that only produced electricity during the night, rationed food, and no other humans for miles. The times in Australia left such a mark on her that she wrote a whole book about it called Intermission. In it, she remembers giant rats and frogs, how she walked half a mile to the vegetable garden, butchered animals, kept the ranch running with renovating, decorating, cooking and housekeeping, spending most of her life indoors as a frontier wife.
It was quite an experience. It was quite an experience. And I found out some extraordinary things that I should have known, that I can do without almost any kind of luxury except people. Human contact is without a doubt the most important thing in anyone's life, whether they admit it or not.
And Baxter consequently slowed down her career significantly for the next few years, only returning occasionally to the US for work, for example in a remake of Cimarron or in Walk on the Wild Side with Jane Fonda. But these were not passion projects, but jobs she mostly did to make money to keep the ranch running. The marriage between Anne and Randolph would ultimately end in divorce in 1969. Anne Baxter described the different personalities as, "He liked movies like Gigi. I preferred Ingmar Bergman." And I mean, good for her. She finished her book about her time in Australia with a call to her agent, telling him that she was back. However, she also remembered, "I was afraid to come back, afraid to face the battering rams of civilization." Still, she knew that she couldn't wait to return to the business that had been such a large part of her life since she was 13 years old. "I am an actress first and last. Acting is not what I do, it's what I am."
What's brought you the greatest satisfaction in acting?
Love, I guess. There's a certain communication with an audience. It's like a communication between people who are truly in love or truly, truly great friends. There's something that happens between you and the audience. And you can touch them and communicate with them. Truly entertain them.
And so Anne threw herself back into work, but after her long absence, she hardly received any more offers for movie roles, and therefore focused on the stage and the small screen instead, including guest appearances on many TV shows like Batman or opposite Jane Seymour in East of Eden. In 1971, in a wonderful piece of stunt casting, she replaced Lauren Bacall as Margot Channing in the musical Applause on Broadway. Like it had happened so often to Anne Baxter, she was again not the first choice to follow Lauren Bacall and only took the part after Rita Hayworth had dropped out of the project. Anne Baxter saw a lot of rave for her performance and even praise from audience member Bette Davis. By the way, if we want to continue the comparisons to Eleanor Parker, she too would play Margot Channing in a production of Applause later.
What was it like to come back to Broadway years later and play what is known as the Bette Davis role in the musical version of All About Eve?
It was a fascinating experience.
You said you were a non-dancer. It must have been a taxing
Well, no,
experience.
I love to dance, but I mean, after all, doing Ron Field's very complicated pat your head, you know, on your tummy routines was something else. And in order to train for this, I had to do 4 hours of ballet a day. Well, you do 4 hours of ballet for a start, and then rehearse, and then sing. You know, it's a new experience.
Anne Baxter appeared on the big screen for the last time in 1980 in Jane Austen in Manhattan, and gave her final stage appearance in 1982 as the Queen in Hamlet. The paths of Anne Baxter and Bette Davis would cross one final time indirectly when Betty, after appearing in the pilot of the TV show Hotel, had to turn down future appearances in the show due to medical reasons. Anne Baxter was again asked to step in, but she refused to be recast in a role Bette Davis had created and instead appeared as her character's sister-in-law. By the way, Eleanor Parker guest starred in one episode of the show.
On Hotel, when Bette Davis became ill, how long did you have to prepare to take her place?
About 72 hours. Well, you see, Betty was terribly ill, and they called me to join the show as her sister-in-law and kind of spell her, both during her convalescence and after she came back, and it just took too long, and her spirit was so terrific. She was sure she'd be back in October. She was sure she'd be back in November, and it was terrible.
Yeah.
You know, and one of the reasons I took the show was that there would be an opportunity to work with her again. We hadn't worked together in 30 years. And I have the greatest respect for her.
Anne Baxter stayed with Hotel until her death on December 12, 1985, after suffering a stroke while Christmas shopping in New York a week earlier.
You know, and when you have a good experience, savor it. And this is true of life. Always try to really know how good something is when you're in the middle of it.
Not
and
later.
No. And when you have a nice lunch with a friend, you know, or you have a lovely letter from someone, or enjoy it, know it at the time. I'm always saying, oh, isn't this fun? Well, this is fun.
Being alive.
Yes, quite right.
Anne Baxter said about herself, "I have a large appetite for life. I want to experience everything." And this she certainly did, enjoying a private and professional life with ups and downs. Maybe not always to her fullest satisfaction, and sometimes with endings she didn't anticipate, but she approached her work and her entire life with dedication, seriousness and openness, and always without regrets. As she said, maybe the ultimate failure is not to dare to fail. Today she might not be truly remembered as one of the icons of Hollywood's golden age, but her achievements still speak for themselves. I mean an Oscar, The Magnificent Ambersons, The Ten Commandments, All About Eve. Most actresses don't even experience one milestone like this, let alone so many. For Anne Baxter, acting was always about pushing your boundaries and trying yourself at parts that might frighten you at first. Acting is the hardest play in the world. I revere it. It is more fun and more agonizing sweat than anything I've ever known. Her famous grandfather once told her, "See into life, don't just look at it." And she was always rightfully proud to follow this guidance her entire life.
Miss Baxter, 30 years ago you told a reporter that you'd rather be thought of as beautiful than intelligent. Would you say the same thing
My
today?
dear man, I never in this world could say that. Where in the devil did you read that?
I've forgotten the source now, but I dug it up.
God knows I have.
Yes.
Never in
You'd
this
rather
world.
be thought of as both, I should imagine.
No, I don't want to be thought of as either. You know, there's a thing in this country that drives me right up the wall. You know, Americans label everything. You know? Something has to be
Either this
an
or that.
award winner so many times, or it has to be better than something else, or a favorite something or other. What's your favorite this, your favorite that? Or which would you rather do, films or the stage? I don't know.
Really, there's no choice at all.
Why?
Is it?
It's like a pinball machine.
Yeah.
I don't want to be known as either. I'd just like to be known as an actress.